Alyssa Strickland is a licensed professional counselor, board certified art therapist, and certified substance abuse counselor with over 10 years of experience in working with children,
Mhm.
adolescents, adults, and families. She has worked within the community, residential inpatient and outpatient settings. She has facilitated presentations and workshops at the local, state, and national level to provide education and training on areas of specialty, including art therapy, child adolescent populations, and suicide prevention. She also serves as a supervisor slash consult to residents in counseling, licensed professionals, and those seeking their ATR and CSAC certification. Alyssa has received training in play therapy, emotion focused family therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and trauma informed care. She believes strongly in compassionate care that supports individual autonomy and increases access to an individual's innate ability to heal. Alyssa is deeply appreciative of the opportunities to serve clients, families, supervisees, and trainees on their journey. Passing it over to you, Alyssa, to take it away for today. And thank you for agreeing to be here with us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Danielle. Um, thank all of you. I am really excited to be here. I love facilitating trainings. This is absolutely like part of my heart as a clinician. I like, the exchanging of knowledge, the sparking ideas, building community. Um, and I also want to thank you all for being a part of that support within our community. Thank you truly for all that you all do. I know it's hard work. Um, I, like Danielle said, please feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout the presentation. When I was um, running through this, it's really weird to do a training on Zoom and not be able to interact with all of you because I like that part of it. But I know just because of format and time, I'm going to run through a lot of information. We're going to be pretty content heavy in this first part. And then get into some more like practical experiential things in the second part of the presentation after the break. Um, so yes, please feel free to ask questions. And disclaimer, just because I am an art therapist, this training is not a substitute for formal studies in art therapy that requires much more extensive work. But I do want to give you all this overview and some practical applications in your practice. So in doing that, these are our objectives, which I think you all have. Understanding what art therapy is, what art therapy is not, identifying population circumstances most appropriate for art therapy referrals and services. We're going to talk a little bit about art media, ways to process artwork, learn about resources for art and creative therapies training so you all can further your knowledge and education, and also talk about referrals for art therapy services. Learning skills and ways to respond to your clients' creativity and art making, and support your clients in self-regulating, expressing, and definitely encouraging continued art making. That is something that I definitely want to emphasize. So who guessed that we were going to start an art therapy presentation with Eminem? But that's what we're doing. This is something that I incorporate into my presentations. I feel like this Eminem lyric actually encompasses what art and art therapy can do for the populations we serve. Art therapy, and we'll go more into this later, goes beyond what words can express. So the process of art making, and actually the process of reflecting on that art making through more art making and responsive art making, taps into different parts of the brain, and the aspects of it go beyond what our words can express. So I can't tell you what it really is. I can only tell you what it feels like. Art therapy is showing what it feels like and what those internal experiences are in a way that is beyond words. So going into definitions for art therapy. This is taken from the American Art Therapy Association. I'm going to refer to them as ATA. They're a very central part of our field. They're our national organization. Art therapy is an integrative mental health and human services profession that enriches the lives of individuals, families, and communities through active art making, creative process, applied psychological theory, and human experience within a psychotherapeutic relationship. So the roots of art therapy, as you might guess, are in combining the fields of art and psychology in this very unique way. Art therapy is based on the idea that the creative process and art making is healing and life enhancing. When you create art in a session, you have this tangible item that allows the client to externalize their internal experience. Okay, so they're expressing themselves and releasing, ideas, experiences, things that might be built up inside of them into that art making process and into the art making product. Art therapy supports the belief that all individuals have the capacity to express themselves creatively, and that the art product is actually less important than the process of making the art. So we will definitely talk a little more about that as well. Benefits of art therapy, I like to think of it on two different levels. So art therapy can facilitate these very deep processing points through metaphors, through artistic representations of traumatic experiences. And you can dive very deep into a person's internal experience and trauma in art therapy. It also works in a little more of a surface way to support skill building. And so this is things like, I made a list here, but frustration tolerance, and figuring out how to work through a problem, supporting independent problem solving, gratification delay, in having to work through an art process that takes a little longer, or maybe takes more than one session. Self-regulation, just art as a coping mechanism, art in interpersonal interactions and relationship building, social skills building. We also see all of that with this deeper way of processing. So not all clients are at that point where they can go super deep in art therapy sessions, as I'm sure you all have had experience with that too. Every client's different. But these are two levels that I kind of see art therapy working at. Art therapy settings. So places where art therapists work. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but you can find us in hospitals, psychiatric facilities, rehabilitation centers, wellness centers, forensic institutions, schools, crisis centers, senior communities, private practice, veterans clinics is a big one, and other community clinics. So a little further into just defining art therapy. Art therapy is a profession facilitated by a professional art therapist, a master's level or higher art therapist. Art therapists are guided by ethical standards and scope of practice. Their education and supervised training prepares them for culturally proficient work with diverse populations in a variety of settings. Art therapy is used with children, adults, families, groups, and art therapists are equipped to work with people challenged with medical and mental health difficulties, as well as individuals seeking emotional, creative, and spiritual growth. Art therapy is appropriate for any age level. A lot of people have the notion that art therapy is just for work with kids, and that is very, very much not true. Any age. And art therapy is integrative and uniquely expressive. The processes that we use in art therapy engage the mind, body, and spirit in ways that are distinct from verbal articulation in that more traditional talk therapy sense. Art therapy is used to improve cognitive and sensory motor functions, foster self-esteem and self-awareness, cultivate emotional resilience, promote insight, enhance social skills, reduce and resolve conflicts and distress, and advance societal change. Art therapy is empowering. This is one of the really awesome benefits of art therapy, is the opportunity for that visual and symbolic expression, to give a client a voice and to allow the autonomy in how the client talks about that artwork, how much or how little they say. It can help them feel more in control of other things in their life. The autonomy and control that they have in creating art and in working through art therapy processes can actually translate to other areas of their life too, and support that empowerment. So art therapy is not interpretation or analysis of just the artwork alone. Art therapists are pretty used to people coming to us and saying, hey, will you just assess this drawing, that my client did, and tell me what's going on, like diagnostically, or like, is there trauma? And art therapists are probably not going to do that for you. Client art making in the session and the therapeutic relationship is a part of the art therapy process and is very important in building, we're going to call it curiosity about the artwork that's created. So it's not this direct, oh, you drew this in this way, so this means that. We don't make those kinds of interpretations. We are observing other things in sessions, affect, body language, use of materials, choice of materials, approach to the task. All of those things are giving art therapists information and, guiding us in how we guide our client or support our client in those moments. Art therapists most often approach client artwork with curiosity. That's going to be an important word, and support autonomy in the client's really just like their presence in session. We want to support autonomy as much as possible. Art therapy is not art education, although art therapists do teach skills and might provide education about art materials or art processes. We are not doing just fine arts training. Art therapy is not that's not a focus of our work. Art therapy is not solely the incorporation of art into a therapy session. I had mentioned the importance of art therapy education and training to make sure that you have a full picture of that session and are working with the client, the art materials, the art process, and the art product in a way that is supportive and safe. So just using art in a session doesn't constitute art therapy. Another thing that has come up so frequently that the American Art Therapy Association has actually posted an article on their website. Coloring books are not art therapy. Even mandalas, which are really awesome to use, very calming, very relaxing, that is more along the lines of self-care processes, and coping mechanisms that might be talked about, but that in itself, it's not oh, I'm doing my adult coloring book, so I'm doing art therapy. That's something separate. So there is such an extensive history of art therapy, and I wanted to just give like a brief view of it, so that you guys have an idea of where art therapy started. And I had the honor of getting part of my art education under an art therapy pioneer named Bruce Moon. So I always give him a little shout out because he was a big part of my my training and my learning experience. And since art therapy is a relatively new field in the professional sense, some of our art therapy pioneers that really paved the way are still around and accessible, which is pretty neat. So Bruce Moon, I thought this was just a great quote. Whenever and wherever people have used imagination and creative process in the service of healing, the history of art therapy can be found. So art therapy goes way back, ancient roots. Art is known as the earliest form of communication, and we are literally using art as a method of communication with our clients in art therapy sessions. So that idea has been around forever. Ancient cultures recognized art as a means for healing, expression, communication. The Egyptians incorporated art into healing rituals. We have Aboriginal rock art, petroglyphs, cave paintings. Ancient Greeks understood the power of arts in fostering well-being, believing that art could support cathartic release and restore balance. So even these kind of like therapeutic notions are present way back in our history. The field began to kind of define that therapeutic intentionality in the 18th and 19th centuries. Medical professionals were beginning to see positive effects of art on their patients, especially in hospital settings. Um, Dr. Adrian Hill was a British artist who actually personally discovered the therapeutic benefit of art while battling tuberculosis. He is known as the father of art therapy and actually coined the term art therapy in 1942. Um, he designed an art therapy program at a rehabilitation hospital during World War II. So that was definitely, part of our start. Art therapy came to be defined as more of a profession in the 20th century. Carl Jung, Freud recognized art as having healing potential and offering access to the subconscious. I want to go through a few pioneers in the field. This list is by no means exhaustive, but just to give, again, just like a small general window. Margaret Nomberg is known as the mother of art therapy. She defined the field, introducing art therapy as a modality based on her experiences in working with mentally ill children, and actually began a school with this purpose in mind. She believed the subconscious contained the most essential thoughts and feelings and was best expressed through those thoughts and feelings were best expressed through imagery and symbolism that can happen in art. Florence Kane referred to herself as an artist and art educator, and actually not an art therapist, but she's still very important in the development of the profession. She also taught at the Walden School. She was actually sisters with Margaret Nomberg. She believed human beings perceive the world and process information through movement, emotion, and thought. If you're interested in diving further into that, you can look up Kane scribbles. They are very, very interesting. Florence Kane developed Kane scribbles, and it's a really cool art therapy technique that is absolutely still used today. Edith Kramer is our last one. She fled Prague before World War I and actually taught art to children refugees from Nazi Germany. Her beliefs were developed in her work with children with severe emotional and behavioral problems. She believed that destructive impulses and emotions could actually be redirected into art processes to calm and regulate those emotions and that impulsivity in the client. She developed what's called art as therapy, which is an approach with focus on both the art process and the art product in mind. The last thing that I will briefly talk about is the establishment of our national organization, and which has a really neat history in itself. The professionals that came together were from multiple fields, including social work, psychiatry, art education, and fine arts. These professionals came together and developed the American Art Therapy Association in 1969. So going through, just a note about art therapy and neuroscience. We have so much to learn about neuroscience in general, and art therapy is that the field is really starting to pick up more research in this area, and we absolutely need more. We have found evidence supporting positive impacts of art therapy for trauma, self-regulation, memory, pain, and relationships. So that's evidence we're getting from neuroscience studies. Art therapy is considered a intervention that involves the mind and the body. So automatically we're, involving the nervous system, the muscles, we're working with that tension, and obviously involving the brain. Contrary to popular belief, that art is a purely right-brained activity, it actually activates both the right and left hemispheres of the brain. The left hemisphere, just a cool note, is where language is located. And it makes a lot of sense that art is the earliest form of communication, right? We're hitting that part of our brain. We also know that our emotions have a physiological basis. Van der Kolk has taught us a lot about this. Think the body keeps the score. That book delves very deeply into how we store things in our minds and our bodies, how we store our experiences. So this is very important for art therapy because art making in itself is a sensory experience that connects with that physiological basis of our emotions. So we have we know that images have a strong and direct impact on our bodies as well. A lot of times, trauma is stored in those images and sensory experiences. And we actually have interventions within art therapy and just art making in general that tap into those parts of the brain where trauma is stored. So if we can get into those areas and work with them in a creative way, that has, of course, huge potential to be incredibly impactful and positive for our clients. Our bodies, this is just a little more evidence on the trauma end of things. Our bodies respond to mental images as if they are reality. So when we're creating imagery of trauma, of client experiences, they're actually working with those, or the brain is processing those like they are happening in real time. It's a very similar activation that's happening in the brain. So the healing potential from that is huge. If you want any further information on art therapy and neuroscience, I've just got a few names for you. Bruce Perry, Francis Kaplan, Noah Haas Cohen, and Juliet King are all have a lot of literature out there about neuroscience and art making. Metaphor is a hugely important part of art therapy. So this also deserves its own slide. There are historical contexts and use of metaphors, and they've been a vital way that we have communicated throughout our history. Think about like stories, fables, fairy tales, even family stories that have been passed down. We use these metaphors to convey lessons, to teach, to convey truths, and have been using metaphors for a very long time. There is safety in the metaphors that art can create. So just an example, if a client is having some kind of block, they're having a really difficult time accepting something, processing something, it can be really helpful and hit a different part of the brain if instead of verbalizing, right, like trying to figure out words to describe that block, how to get through it, problem solving, an art therapy intervention for that might be to draw a wall, right? Like, what does your wall look like in this situation? And then from metaphors in the imagery, we can actually talk through perhaps ways to problem solve that, right? Like, how do you um, get through the wall, right? Is it possible to overcome? How might you do that? So we're working with metaphor and talking about the image versus talking about this thing that's blocking the client. We're allowing that safety and externalizing things and looking at them in a symbolic way, in a metaphoric way, so that clients don't necessarily have to talk about the details of their experiences, the details of their trauma, figure out words to describe something, because the art is going to go beyond what words alone can describe. And that is a term coined by Bruce Moon, metaverbal communication. Art goes beyond words, beyond what words can express. Another, I guess going back to one thing about client autonomy in metaphor, that is very supported in the metaphoric experience too. When the client externalizes that imagery, they are the ones who get to have control over it. So they control the metaphor and the representations and how they work with them, what they might mean. They're in charge of their art, which supports that autonomy and supports safety in processing. The art also provides safety in being a third member of the therapy space, right? So the dialogue and processing isn't just occurring between the therapist and the client. There's also interactions with art making, right? Sometimes the art therapist even makes art with the client while the client is making art. So there's interactions with the art process and the art product, which also provides some safety in that kind of third party in the room, right? It doesn't always have to be this direct dialogue, which can sometimes feel confrontational for clients, and it eases that a bit. Okay, I think we're doing pretty good on time so far. So I am going to run through a case study, and I hope, bring some of these concepts together a little bit, just through a case of a kiddo that I worked with a few years back. There is a process that I use in the case study, and I want to give you some information and background on that art process before we go into the case, just so you know some of the ins and outs. The maker, destroyer, creator process is something that I do with clients, and it's based on research, the research of Lynn Capitan. So she went into other countries and did social action projects within communities, and usually traumatized communities. And she was seeing these very distinct themes coming up of creation, and then destruction of that creation, right? A trauma, a natural disaster, um, something like that, broke everything down. And then the rebuilding, recreation, transformation, resiliency process that came after that. So she wanted to involve the community in art making that followed those themes. So she was actually using the metaphor of creation, destruction, transformation in her social action within these communities. And I just adapted things a bit to fit with the population that I worked with at a residential hospital. So I would ask my client to select an emotion that they're struggling with. And that emotion can be anything. Even if it's not, if the client identifies something that's not technically an emotion, I still roll with it to support that autonomy piece. And I also inform them that I'm going to guide them through several stages of this artwork, and that the resident won't really know what the layout is until the end. Things are going to change through this process. So the client selects drawing materials to pretty quickly represent whatever emotion or whatever response they've given in that initial discussion. So they're given about 5 minutes to represent things. And again, informed that their art product will change in some way in the next step of this. So the destroyer stage, that 5-minute art product, I asked them to cut it up, rip it up, whatever they want to do to it to destroy it. So the client is actually destroying their own artwork, which is sometimes kind of difficult. Which is why I like to throw in that warning. I was working with adolescents, and I just couldn't imagine not giving him that that piece of information beforehand. Lynn Capitan in her work, she did not forewarn them, and actually, I believe, would have them destroy each other's artwork. So they would pass the artwork to another person to destroy it. Okay, so the creator part of this, or the transformation stage of this, I tell the client that they have a pile of whatever emotion they've named or whatever response they've given. And their next task is to transform the pieces in some way. And they can use anything in the room to do that. Literally wide open. And I've got a lot of art materials in my room. I also really love this quote in as just illustrative of that, destruction and transformation process, and trauma. The monster who attacks me every day is destruction. Out of the duel comes the transformation. I turn destruction into creation over and over again. I feel like this is such an innate part of life, that process of, vulnerability, putting things out there, creation, having it be rejected, having it be destroyed, experiencing loss, right? And then the rebuilding that comes after that. And these are the kinds of metaphors that I hope that we can work with in art therapy. So now we're going to get into a more the more practical application part. I wanted to give you that overview of art therapy and some examples, how it's used. And now I'm hoping to give you guys some good information that you can use in your work. I think I guess I'll save that question for the end. I got some questions from a participant and I noted them. So I will come back to that in our last few minutes. So I don't know if any of you have maybe gone to an art therapy training or some kind of art experiential and have heard, you know, everyone's an artist, right? In response to like, I can't draw, or um, I'm not good at this. I don't know how to paint. It's not gonna look like anything. It's just gonna look like a blob. And you get this, really happy response, right? Of everyone's an artist. And I think that a lot of responses to that statement can be, deep sigh, eye roll. But I wanted to go a little further into why that might be happening and how that's related to our own experiences. Um, Artistic skill is actually something that can be developed and is an innate part of us as human beings. Our our educational systems support art making and other creative activities up until a certain point. Um, but a lot of us lose that push in artistic development at around age 11 or 12. And the uh, decision ultimately to keep moving forward, even though we're not necessarily having a whole lot of it in our educational experience, or it's not an integrated part anymore, right? We're more electively choosing to like take the art class or do some kind of our own work in our artistic development. Usually that decision is deeply influenced by whether we have a really negative interaction with a well-intentioned adult, usually. So I am guessing that a lot of you, maybe most of you, maybe all of you, can cite a specific moment in your life that you can remember vividly where an adult has judged your art, right? Or some kind of creative expression, right? Singing, dancing, instrumental music, drawing, painting, like any of the creative arts. Have you ever been told, um, your dog doesn't look like a dog, right? It looks like a mouse, or your singing is actually really out of pitch. Like, why are you singing so much? Why are you always drawing like mountain landscapes? Why don't you do something else? So it's usually well intentioned, but sometimes that's all it takes to stop us from continuing to grow in our artistic development, because now there's been a judgment placed on this internal expression of ourselves and this very vulnerable expression of ourselves. Now there's this concept of, is it good enough? Am I good enough? And if that is too vulnerable, we're not going to take those risks, especially as kids, when that's already such a difficult time. So I want to reinforce that art is a process that is accessible to everyone. And I am addressing this because I want to help you understand what kind of impact that can have and also support you in supporting your clients and even just those around you in continued creativity, continued art making. Because like I said, that is within us as human beings and something that deserves to be fostered. These are some tips in how to respond to clients' art. So it is totally okay if a client wants to make artwork in a session. And you'll help support their autonomy and safe space and creative expression in doing these things. So if you can be curious about the artwork, invite the client to share as much or as little as they want to about what they made or what they're doing. It's also appropriate to be curious about feelings that might come up when they're making the art or when they're looking at their art product. So if you can remember that curiosity, that's an important one. Try to avoid labels and interpretation. We've all been there, I think, in, working with a kid, seeing a kid's drawing, and, we're talking about how much we love the cat in their drawing, only to find out that it's a house, and we made this huge mistake in labeling what we thought it looked like, right? So we can cause unintentional harm when we do that, or when we provide a correction, right? Like, oh, why is your tree purple, right? Trees are supposed to be green. Let me help you draw that house the right way. A roof doesn't really look like that. When we intervene like that, we're taking away that autonomy that's so important in the art process, and also placing judgment and correction on a very vulnerable activity for our clients. So take the client's lead on labeling the things in their artwork. And if they want to make meaning out of something in their artwork, they get to do that. It is not anyone else's job but the client's. So ask about specific areas of the artwork, or you can make observations about like their use of color, like, oh, I just a reflective statement, right? I see you used a lot of green over here. Or can you talk about what's happening in this part of your painting? So asking, kind of inviting questions like that, and accepting a responsive no if that's what the client says, because it's up to them. Praising effort over performance or the art product is another really helpful thing to do. Even saying, talking about how hard they worked, right? Like, oh, I saw you work so hard on this part of your painting. Like, I'm guessing that took a lot of patience to be able to, focus and do that. Or I love hearing about your artwork. We want to avoid judgment and even the positive feedback, right? If it's like, I love this. This is such a beautiful picture. It looks exactly like the sunset we saw last night. That can put some pressure on the art making, right? Like now the client might feel, oh, I've got to make every picture realistic, right? So if I feel like doing something else, that maybe that actually wouldn't be okay. So I know this is a really careful dance, and we all mess up. I'm an art therapist, I mess up. So just trying to keep these things in mind to, open up the dialogue, provide a safe space, and support the autonomy of our clients. Thinking about the client artwork as a piece of the client is helpful too. This is much more than just a drawing. This is a representation of an internal experience. It's a piece of them. So those things can help support clients in continued art making, which is going to be healthy. You know, when we can encourage that creative expression, healthy expression of our clients' internal world, that is going to be a positive thing. So, where's the line between incorporating art in your practice, you know, responding to your client's art, and actually practicing art therapy? So, just to help define that a little bit, um, art therapists are master's level or higher clinicians. There are also certifications offered after a master's degree is earned. So there is an ATR, which is kind of the first step in the process, that is a registered art therapist and involves some of the same things we would do for licensure, right? The working with clients in art therapy settings and getting supervision for that. And ATRBC is a registered art therapist who's also board certified. So after they've gotten their ATR credential, they take a board exam and become a BC. And ATCS is an art therapy credentialed supervisor. So that's just you actually don't need that credential to do art therapy supervision, but that's, you know, the highest credential you can get there. And those are all from the Art Therapy Credentials Board. These credentials apply to Virginia art therapists. So if you're searching for a referral, looking for these letters would be good and would show that this person is a educated, trained in the field of art therapy. So the credentials apply to Virginia art therapists, but I will say some states, you know, are funky about licensure and credentialing. So they, some states actually have standalone licenses for art therapists, and some the credentials look different, the letters look different, and require some different things too. But I think these letters from the Art Therapy Credentials Board apply to most states, but I just wanted to let you know that there are some differences. Advertising services accurately. So clinicians are not able to call themselves art therapists without that master's degree. Counselors advertising art therapy services without appropriate education or credentials are falsely advertising themselves. So please be careful about that. You know, it's actually not okay to say that you do art therapy in your practice if you're not an art therapist. Another thing that helps us define this line is thinking about the role of your role and the role of the art and the art process in your work. So are you focused more on these things like, you know, this is a coping strategy for the client, or, you know, I've noticed this particular thing helps them regulate, you know, maybe it's creating a mandala or coloring a mandala. Are you supporting the client's autonomy in what they're sharing, versus delving into some of those deeper metaphors, which would be more on the art therapy end of things. So considering materials that you're using as well. And this is like a big topic for art therapists, how we use art media in our sessions. So it's difficult to like summarize and boil it down, but I think what I want you guys to know is the concept of containment with art therapy materials. So you have probably had the experience of a child or even a teen in your office um, using paint, or observing a child using paint. And it can get very expansive and all over the place, even if you're not finger painting. Sometimes the kids will paint themselves and, splatter paint everywhere. Um, Paint is a fluid medium. So it also, in that fluidity, there's also more affect and expansive expression of emotions. Those things kind of go together. So a more containing media like a pencil or a marker or a pen supports that uh, containment and doesn't allow things to get that expansive, because sometimes when it gets there, it's really hard to get them back. And that's another thing that art therapists are, trained to do, is know what goes on with these different types of materials and be able to intervene as needed. There's also art therapy materials have a lot of kinesthetic and sensory qualities to them, so which can be triggering. Sometimes clients will have a very deep emotional response just to touching an art material. Sometimes it could bring back a traumatic experience, a flashback. So just keeping that in mind, you're not going to, of course, know what's going to be triggering and not triggering for your clients. But if you can think about just that containment piece, that's an important part of art media. So, referring to art therapy, I will actually answer one of the questions that I got during the break. Somebody asked about, would art therapy be appropriate for TBIs? Absolutely, yes. That's actually a big thing in the field of art therapy. Art therapy is used a lot with veterans. And the healthy expression, the physical nature of art processes are helpful. And there's also an impact because we're activating different parts of the brain in both hemispheres. There's, positive impacts on memory, cognition, and kind of redeveloping, relearning identity after something traumatic like that, like a trauma or a brain injury. Art therapy is also adaptive in terms of materials. So if someone does have limitations in terms of dexterity or even ability to sit, stand, lay down, there's been art processes developed for people that are restricted to a hospital bed and actually can't even sit up. So that is absolutely one place that would be appropriate for art therapy referral. And art therapists are already in the VAs. Clients, just generally clients who are struggling with verbal engagement or verbal processing, great place for art therapy. Art therapy has been shown to be very effective in processing trauma, adjustment, and grief. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, even pain management. There's been research on that in the field of art therapy. Remember, it can be facilitated in individual, family, and group formats. And there's no restrictions in terms of age limitations or artistic ability. If you are interested in furthering your own learning or just supporting art therapy and continued art making, there's some options here. there actually is a postmaster's degree in art therapy that's offered by several schools across the country, including EVMS. The programs are, there's still a lot of hours, between 30 and 36 hours of complementary work, right, to your original master's degree in some kind of mental health field that can make you able to identify you as someone who can do art therapy work. So that is an option. Attending, of course, trainings, those are offered through lots of organizations, art therapy, play therapy, music therapy. Please make sure these trainings that you're attending are facilitated by masters, at least master's level art therapists, if not credentialed art therapists, ATR, ATRBC, ATCS. You can participate in community events. Our state chapter of the American Art Therapy Association, we're called VATA, the Virginia Art Therapy Association. They do lots of events across the state that are fun to get involved in. And of course, supporting continued art making and creative forms of expression in our clients. So these are just the websites for things that I just mentioned: the Virginia Art Therapy Association, the American Art Therapy Association. Both of those sites, you can also search for registered art therapists in your area. So if you need to have an idea of who you can refer to, they'll have like a credential lookup. And then EVMS does offer that postmasters in art therapy. So this is the link to that site. Okay, so we are going to do an experiential now, because I feel like that's very helpful to have that kind of hands-on experience and practical application, and see, you know, maybe some potential benefits of an art process. So take a deep breath, right? This is not a I hope not a threatening process. And I'm not going to ask anybody to, you know, share their artwork up on their camera or anything like that. You'll need some, preferably blank, unlined paper, but if all you have is lined paper, that's fine. A pen or a pencil, and hopefully something with color. If you have highlighters, markers, colored pencils, crayons, doesn't have to be anything fancy. Even if you just have a pencil and a sheet of notebook paper, that will totally work for this process. So I'll give you guys a minute to gather. So before we start, I just want everyone to rate your level of stress in this moment. So scale from 0 to 10. 0 is I am experiencing absolutely no stress. 10 is this is the most stressed I've been in my entire life. So you don't have to put that into the chat or anything, but just if you could make a note of it, rating your current level of stress. Okay, so on your paper, trace your hand wherever you want on the paper. And we're actually going to do multiple hand tracings. You don't have to do your whole hand either. If your paper is smaller, you can do parts of your hand. That's fine. But I want you to do at least two hand tracings that overlap each other. And um, keep in mind that if you're using something like a Sharpie, I should have said this earlier, you'll probably get lines around your hand. Um, so if you want um, to avoid that, something like a pencil would be good. And then if you want to outline it, you can outline it after the fact. Um, but hand tracing does tend to get you that nice evidence around your whole hand. So um this is I believe I traced my hand 5 times. You again, at least twice. You can do more. You can do more than 5 if you want. Just, until it feels right. Trace your hand to create overlap.
Alyssa, we have a question. Does it have to be the same hand?
Oh, that's such a good question. No, it does not.
Does it have to be your whole hand? Like, could you just trace your fingers in one section if you wanted to?
Absolutely. Yes. Okay, so while you all are finishing up, I'm gonna kind of preface the next part of this in overlapping the hand tracings. Um, you can see that you've created basically a bunch of shapes. Some of them might be really big, some of them might be super tiny. Um, but that's what we've done in that overlap. So the next step of this is to use color or even just design if you would rather do it that way, or if you only have a pen or a pencil, and fill in the different sections. So I tried to give you all an example of like the um, design and also color options. Either is fine, a combination is fine, however you want to go about this. And I'll give you guys maybe like 5 minutes to work. Okay. I know most of you are probably not done. I actually keep these with me, like in my office. I have the one that I started for you guys over here. Um, and just like add to it for a few minutes when I need to. So if you enjoyed this, please feel free to take that strategy and, keep it nearby just for when you need just a couple of minutes to recenter. Um, so I would like for you to check in with yourself again and rate your level of stress. Um, if you would like to enter in the difference into the chat, whether it was, my stress went down 2 points, so I'm a -2, or I went up 2 points. What are you doing to me, Alyssa? Right? Um, but just kind of putting it in there so we can see how we did with this. Okay, so down, maybe like 1 to 3 points. One person, no change. So if you think I do rating scales a lot with my clients. I mean, half a point reduction in your stress makes a significant difference in like allowing your nervous system to rest a little bit, um, gives you more capacity. Um, oh, somebody's teenager. um, it gives you more capacity, and allows that like grounding, recentering. Um, you might notice a difference in your rating, um, for a few reasons. So I'm going to walk through this real quick, just the art therapy perspective. Tracing your hand, just the act of tracing your hand is a grounding skill. It is very sensory, right? You can feel this very distinctive and very different, right? Because probably a lot of us haven't traced our hands in a while. Um, so you can feel it around your fingers, right? That very different feel of whatever drawing utensil you used. There was probably a sound associated with it. There might have also been memory associated with it too. Things might have come up that evoked more sensory experiences from maybe, childhood. So that's one thing. And it's important to note that those sensory memories can also be unpleasant, right? And can up the stress. But in general, sensory grounding can be good if we find the right sensory things that are grounding to that individual. This is the act of coloring those sections is a mindfulness process. It's derived from Zentangling. If you want to look that up, that was very, very popular at one point. I think it's died down a little bit. But Zentangling is actually a very specific process of breaking up a small working space and filling it in with different designs that are actually like the Zentangle developers have examples of different designs that you can put in there. So you actually have something to work from. But so this is like a Zentangling process in filling in each of those sections. It's also a repetitive process. Our brains like pattern. They like it when things make sense. This is contained, right? So it has a high potential to feel good and to be regulating. It's also a success-oriented task that you know, a lot of people, as they get more into this, can make something that they appreciate the final product. So works in multiple ways. Hopefully you all benefited from that, and I had a part in helping your stress through the rest of the day. So we are at question time. I did pretty good on time, Danielle. Did pretty good.
Yes, you did amazing.
So questions, depending on how many they are, can probably still go through.
I sent you a few in your direct messages.
Oh,
I'm not
yes,
sure
yes,
if
yes.
you, yeah.
Yes. Oh, yes, the bilateral stimulation aspect. Yep, yep, yep. Yes. Okay, so answering those questions, can I have a master's in social work and get certified in art therapy? I'm assuming that you mean through that postmaster's program. And yes, social work, I think, is accepted in all of those postmaster's programs. Of course, you want to check with a specific one. A lot of them offer distance learning options. EVMS was the only one that I knew of in Virginia, but I also saw that someone said that that program isn't up and running, there must have been some kind of break in it, because I think the last time I checked it was. So I apologize for that. But hopefully EVMS will be able to get that going and offer that as an option. But yes, masters in social work, totally appropriate for that. Another
Excuse me?
question. Somebody talk. Hello?
Someone has their
Yeah.
hand raised,
Hi.
but if you could, oh, okay, never mind.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay.
No, it was to add on. That was actually my question. I wanted to add on to it, but you guys can circle back. I didn't
Oh,
really
that's
think
okay.
that through.
Go ahead, Kim.
Okay. I wanted to say first off, thank you for your time and providing us with this information. It's been very insightful. I was asking the question because I'm an intern currently finishing my final year as a master's in social work, and I've basically been tasked to put together like a group. I live in the Virgin Islands, and we're trying to basically extend more mental health services within our community. And
Right.
one of the things that I'm being tasked with is putting together a group on the island. And one of my interests is art therapy. And this is like my first, well, my previous agency had worked with art therapy, what was called art group therapy. After researching, I realized that it wasn't really art therapy. It was kind of having the kids that we work with mindlessly color, and we kind of restructured it so that it followed what we had been researching. But to avoid making this mistake of advertising incorrectly, how would I go about pulling together a group without that certification and using, I guess, the terminology I would use if I say I'm going to be pulling a group together as an intern, a master's in social work intern? How would I advertise for that correctly, if possible?
So, I think it partly depends on what kind of processes you're doing there, but it would be advertised as like an opportunity to create, you know, in a therapeutic space. Art making as a part of coping mechanisms, different way to express yourself, you know, just not using the term art therapy.
Okay.
And I think, you know, the only way to be able to use that terminology would be to go through a program or to do that add-on, right? The postmasters.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay. And I also had a question earlier about forensic art therapy and whether interpretation would be a part of that. Um, Forensic art therapy is like a small section of our field and requires different types of training. And yes, more interpretation. The forensic art therapists that I've been exposed to still value the making art, like being present for the art making process so they can make all of those other observations that can help inform that interpretation. So it's not just standalone artwork that they're taking, in the courtroom and being like, oh, okay, here's what's going on. But yes, forensic art therapy is kind of a different subset. Okay, what else have we got?
We have a do you have to be good at art or good at drawing in order to become an art therapist?
That's such a good question because I answered that for clients and did not answer it for therapists wanting to become an art therapist. So no. And it's like a little heartbreaking when people say good at art because I just don't think that's like a definable like good or bad thing. You do, to go into an art therapy program, most programs ask that you put in a portfolio, but it's kind of in the sense of, or in the spirit of, show me how you express yourself and, show me the artist statements that you've written about your work and how you kind of make meaning from that for yourself. So it's not, does this person have the technical skill set to become an art therapist? That's not really what they're doing. They want to make sure that you have experience with different kinds of media because you need to have that base before you go into an art therapy program. And there's actually studio art coursework that's required to do an art therapy program from scratch. I think with the postmasters, they include those in the program. But I hope that answers the question that, yes, understanding of materials, participating in your own creative expression and being able to reflect on that.
And it looks like the last question we have is please provide some suggestions on by and for people who feel this type of activity is for children. I really enjoy music and art activities and often find that people feel art activities are only for children.
Yeah. And that's hard to overcome. I am also an emotion focused therapist, so I would first go to validation, right? Like of course you are feeling this pressure, right? And like you shouldn't be participating in these kind of processes unless you're a child. So validation, right? Validating where they're coming from. We put a lot of pressure on things just as a society. There's a lot of like expectations and it becomes problematic in those kinds of pressures. So validation first. And then I like going to just the human history, right? Like the act of creating is actually a genuine part of ourselves, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that. And would you maybe want to try something, just take like a small step in this, like a baby step, maybe we're just gonna, scribble for a little bit or do the hand tracing activity. Do a mandala. That's a great one. A mandala is any design within a circle, any kind of radial design. And you can find mandala coloring pages, or you can create your own. You can just get a blank circle and create your own mandala. that's a great tool to help people just start out in their art making journey who are reluctant.